what kind of experience did you have at 3 that stimulated this entire path for you?
She wanted to go out the window and sit on the dormers that were for the window below.
Do you ever see someone come back differently?
They present themselves in a way that comes across as scary. I do perceive demons.
For you being a psychic medium, like what's your views on obviously the life? And then for those that pass on afterlife, what do you believe happens based on these entities that you've spoke to?
Some of it has to do with the way in which the person died. That's a spirit that for some reason didn't go through the transition process.
Do you feel like they're pulled more into our realm, or do you feel like they pull you more into their realm?
The way things work in the living dimension does not work the same way where they are.
This is probably the most important question I'm going to ask you. Are they watching me in the shower? Welcome back to Retraced Echoes. As always, I'm your host. My name is Bert, and I've got to say I'm super excited for 2025. 2025 is going to be a year where we kind of go into different realms of things that maybe we talk about in passing, or what I like to call the fringe. So by that, this year is going to be the year that we're looking at people or events that is outside of the norm that we talk about. In 2023 and 2024, we really looked at locations and the hauntings and the people affected by those. And we're still going to look at that in 2025, but 2025 is also going to be a year where we kind of explain, especially when we talk about paranormal investigations, which we're going to be looking at in 2025 also on this channel, but it's going to kind of feed into that. One of that is going to be our guest that is here today. That's going to be Miss Emily Quinn. And the beauty of this interview is it's really going to take into effect some of the things that we're going to look at when it comes to our investigations a little bit later this year, because we will be calling on potentially different psychic mediums, possibly. I'm going to beg and plead here, Miss Emily Quinn, that, maybe we can reach upon a conversation once we get to that also, and maybe you can help us out with some stuff. But I'm super excited. I know nothing. Okay, let me rephrase that. I know very little about psychic mediums. It's actually funny. I got a funny story before we start with Emily here, and I have her kind of explain what she does. I reached out to Emily, I don't know, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, maybe. I don't know. It feels like forever ago, but my time, it kind of moves around.
It was about like 5 or 6 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was close. I'm in that. I'm in the realm. That's how we'll put it.
Yes.
But I reached out. I saw that she was a psychic medium, and I can't remember exactly where. It would have been one of the forums that I'm in. Typically, it's either in hauntings or it's
Reddit.
I do dabble in some of the things that I don't understand, psychic mediums and stuff like that, just because I have very little understanding. And I'm like, you know what? I feel like this is someone that I could probably connect with. And the cool thing was the style that she had was very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's almost like someone at my level of understanding can actually have a conversation and not feel weird about it, if that makes sense. I want to thank you so much for coming on, but I don't want to butcher what you do or how long you've been doing it. Tell the audience your story. What do you got going on? How did you get started, and where are you at currently?
As you said, I'm a psychic medium. That means that mostly what I do is I can sense, see, hear, communicate with those who have died. So spirits. I'm also able to do that with non-human entities. People most closely associate that with demons, but there's a whole plethora that I could get into that encompasses non-human entities. Occasionally I do get insight into future events or things that are currently going on that I would otherwise not know without this ability. That's kind of what it means. And it's a little different for every single person that is a psychic medium, what they can and can't do, and how it works for them. So pretty much everything that I say is from my personal experience. If there are other mediums out there that are like, well, that's not how it works, it's just because we're different. I have been a medium my entire life. My first memory of encountering a spirit was at age 3. And so I've had this gift forever. It's gotten stronger as I've gotten older. I kept it pretty quiet and on the down low most of my life. And I say I came out of the psychic closet about a year ago. So I've been open about the gift since then.
So for anyone that doesn't know, and most people that have been a part of my podcast, and thank you for everyone that does stop by, I had an experience at a very young age. And I think that's what really kind of stimulated my thought process and wanting to understand more. And it was that experience that kind of changed the path that I took as I've gotten older. I saw a female entity inside my home that looked human, looked as human as me looking at you today. And I think that's the biggest thing that people say, well, what's a ghost look like? And it's like, for me personally, I can only explain what I've seen, similar to kind of what you said. And for me, it was just someone that looked exactly like me and you. And what happened was I got out of bed. I thought my mom and dad was talking. I was supposed to be asleep. I went to the front room. And as I turned a corner, there was a woman standing there that was a stranger. And I was maybe 4 or 5. I was young. And she was talking to someone else in the kitchen that was also not there. I couldn't see them. Now, as I turned this corner, I saw, oh, this isn't mom. I just kind of stood there, and she legit turned around, looked at me and said, "What are you doing out of bed?" When you're that age, it's kind of confusing. It wasn't scary. Like, had it been as horrendous as the movies would make it, I probably would have been scared. But this was just a normal person. And I backed up into a leather chair and I sat down in that leather chair. And my mom ended up getting up. She heard me up. And she then said, "What are you doing out of bed?" And when I turned to look at my mom and I turned back, she was gone. Mm-hmm. So that core memory for me is stuck with me my entire life. And I'm old. Okay. I like to say wise. I'm wise now. I'm not necessarily old. I'm wise. But in all these years, now I kind of look back and I go, what was that? Why did I have that experience? What does that mean? And in addition to that, I've also had what I would call revelations that I probably shouldn't have. And also, I feel like I've have some type of a connection with whatever. And we're going to dive into a lot of that. I have a lot of questions because I like to call myself an internet expert. Okay. So a lot of my ideas come from that. But for you, when you have these experiences at 3, obviously that was my experience. What kind of experience did you have at 3 that stimulated this entire path for you?
Yeah. So, when I was 3, I was at my godmother's house, and she lived in a very old historic house, Victorian, your typical haunted house type place. And there was a little girl named Elizabeth that I would play with. And this particular memory, because to me, she was very much a real person. She was a little older than me, and she also seemed to not understand that I wasn't like her. And so she wanted to go out the window and sit on the dormers that were for the window below, because you could go out the second floor window and sit kind of on the roof. And she opened the window and went out. Physically opened it. I tried to get out to follow her, but I was too small. I didn't have strength. My godmother came up and was like, "What are you doing?" And
ruining all your fun.
Ruined all the fun. Of course, Elizabeth disappeared, and I'm like, where'd she go? Again, not fully comprehending. And my cousin's name is very similar to Elizabeth. And since I was 3, pronouncing things correctly is a little odd. And I accidentally got my cousin in trouble because she's like, well, a 3-year-old's not going to be able to open this window. So somebody must have done it. And yeah, I did get her in trouble, a little bit of trouble.
Whoops. And that's okay. Hey, listen, sometimes a little trouble keeps you engaged in life. Okay.
Yes,
that's how I look at it.
That's true.
So for you, this little girl, how old did she look? Did she look like your age?
No. She was like 5-ish, 5 to 6,
Okay.
and I was 3. So she was older than me, but in the same age range that we could engage and play and things like that.
Now, of course, my mind wants to go to things that you're probably going to divulge in the later part of our conversations, but curiosity. Did you have an opportunity to do any kind of research once you got older of who that could have been?
No, I've not had the opportunity to do that. It's definitely something I've been interested in, but I've not lived in that area for most of my adult life. So it's just not an easy thing to do, really.
For sure. Something fascinating, and I have 2 podcasts. I have this one that we typically just deal with hauntings, and we have another podcast. That one I co-host with a friend of mine, Nick. The name of that one is Deceptive Reality. And basically it's kind of like, I would like to say we started out with the intent of being like an unsolved mysteries, so to speak, like the Robert Stack, the best show ever from the 1990s, right? Yes. But we've kind of morphed into other paranormal things, UFOs and cryptids, and which Unsolved Mysteries kind of handle that also. But one thing that we talk about a lot, and I'm going to bring my thought process into this also, I feel like a lot of times when we talk about spirits or ghosts or whatever my listening audience wants to call it, a lot of times these, I'm going to call it spirits for this part. Whenever there's a spirit of someone that could have potentially passed on, I feel like they always come back in the same facet of how they look, the clothing. It's almost as though they're stuck on repeat, or some people would call that like a residual with intelligence adapted or attached. And even some people that might pass on at, let's say, 70 years old or 80 years old, they don't necessarily come back as that 70 or 80-year-old self. They come back as someone potentially younger. And I'm always amazed by that. Now, obviously, being the psychic medium that you are, and as you said, you can kind of see and sense and have all these abilities. Do you ever see someone come back differently, or are they always the picturesque self that they are the first time you see them?
Yes and no. So spirits are actually able to manipulate the way in which they're perceived. So the fact that, a 70-year-old might come back, looking like they're in their 50s because they were younger, they were healthier, that's the way they want to be remembered. And then you have spirits who, they're jokesters, or, they're kind of jerks. And so they present themselves in a way that comes across as scary. So shadows, or, I've seen ones that come across like they look like monsters or demons, but really they're just people being jerks. So, that's something that, people are able to manipulate once they're on the other side. And actually, I see a lot of what I call people being in their death state. Because I use that to kind of corroborate and validate that I'm speaking to a specific individual, that, okay, so this is how they died. This is what they looked like. This is where they were. So, that can be manipulated. And I think that's something that not a lot of people realize.
That's interesting. The woman that I was talking about at the beginning of the conversation that we had, which kind of branched off, I never talked about that at all until it was 2 Halloweens ago. We did a podcast. It was actually our first listener segment podcast where we took other people's stories, we pieced it together, and we retold their stories for Deceptive Reality. And what's really cool, and I'm very blessed, I have parents that tune in every single week. They're super excited. They can't wait to hear the podcast. And I'm telling this story, and I'm describing this woman. And as I'm describing her, I get a call from my mom. I think it was like the next day or day after, something like that. Anyway, and she said, I'm going to send you a photo and I want you to look at this photo. And I said, okay. And I looked at it, and it was my great grandmother, come to find out, but it was the same woman I was looking at. And what I described in the podcast episode was almost exactly the woman that I saw. And what's crazy is when you look at the photo, she wore her hair a certain way, which is I had never seen a picture of her. Or if I did, I was so young that I didn't piece it together. Mm-hmm. But it was such a crazy, and I think the picture they showed me was a picture they didn't have. Like it came from when my grandparents had passed away and they inherited those photos, which, you know, I was already an adult at that point in time. So I'd never seen those photos. The photos they showed me, I don't think I've ever seen before until they showed me the photos. But the way I remember her, she looked younger than the photos that I saw. But she still had the same hairstyle, the same style of clothing. And I found that very interesting and a little spooky too, because it's like I'm talking about this thing that I see as a kid. Kind of find out her dresser was in that house.
Ah, okay.
Because my parents didn't have a lot of money. So when they didn't have a lot of money, they had inherited some things. And, you know, they were a young couple and they had this kid and I was expensive. Listen, I eat a lot. Okay. So I'm extremely expensive. So, you know, money was a little bit tight. So they had that dresser there. And that kind of brings me, it's interesting because when we talk about hauntings, we typically talk about residual hauntings, which is almost like a record player that's playing over and over again. But then you have intelligence hauntings. And a lot of times when we talk about residuals, those residuals are almost like memories can attach themselves to places, things. But this was an intelligent conversation. I've never been able to piece this together. She turned around and looked at me and said, "What are you doing out of bed?" That's not residual. So it's like, how does that even work? Like, can an intelligence... I have so many thoughts going on in my head at the same time. I'm going to try to piece them together separately. I apologize. But
you're fine.
For you, and obviously what you do, I guess I'm fascinated and I'm confused at the same time because, like, with your mediumship and what you do, like, you do a lot of it virtually, correct?
Yes, although I have done it in person before as well, on investigations or with friends or family and things like that.
Perfect. So I guess for me, and this is why I bring this question up at the same time as what we're just talking about, if somehow my great grandmother, some form of energy or something, like it's not residual, like we talk about, like if this is haunted, their energy is attached to this and it's residual and there's no intelligence. That was an intelligent conversation. So then it makes me question, is there something that's attached to an item that then provides that, I guess, manifestation of intelligence in the same area? Or was she just there and that article of furniture just happened to be there? Would you have any concept of that with your knowledge of your side?
Honestly, it could have been both.
Okay.
My guess and my gut feeling that I'm getting right now is that she just happened to be there. And she was not attached to that dresser in any way. But just because a spirit is attached to an object doesn't mean that they're not intelligent. It's not always residual. And actually, in my experience, a lot of times they are intelligent because they know that they want to be with that object for whatever their reason is. But the energy that spirits use to manifest, it's just all around us. It's in the electricity that runs through our house. So, when people are like, my lights are flickering, or, the light bulbs go out really fast, my batteries die really quickly, they're taking that energy so that they can manipulate things in our world and manifest and things like that. We can also provide them energy. I always say, fear is the most powerful energy that we have. And that's why some spirits do try to scare you, because they can get that energy from you. But, in this case, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So in that sense, you can't truly destroy the spirit of a person. And so she was probably just coming by for a little visit.
That's interesting. I did an interview, said we, almost like you were there too. And maybe it was, maybe in the spirit realm, you was there. There was a gentleman that I did an interview with. His name is Joe. He was possessed for 50 years. And what I found, he said a lot of things that I really look back on now, and I look at things differently. And that's the beauty of these conversations. Like, me and you will have a conversation today that will spark something 5 months from now when I'm talking about something completely different. I'm going to be like, man, I remember when I was talking to Emily on this, and this is what she said on this. And I try to attach different. One of the things that he said that I found fascinating is, in the dimensional plane that they are, time is not a dimensional plane that they consider themselves. So, a prime example. For me, I can think back to a time when I was a kid, or something that happened last week or last month or whatever it may be. And the way he explained it is, for them, they can come and go within that time dimensional plane no differently than we can travel to a grocery store, or we can go to wherever it may be. There's not necessarily a set time frame. Would you say, based on what you've experienced from a spiritual realm, and I know that you're not like you said earlier, for you demonic things are maybe not something that you perceive, but I'm curious if it's the same across the same for all of these, we'll call them entities at this point.
Yeah. I do want to clarify, I do perceive demons. I've encountered one once. They're a lot more rare than TV would like us to believe.
Sure,
but yeah. I perceive the bad as much as I perceive the good. So there is that. But I agree. Time is very much for us in our lifetime. It helps, gives us structure and security. But for those that are, in the spirit realm, all of time and space is happening all at once, which is a theory that people have had. And so, they can kind of jump around, so it's not an impossibility.
I shake my head because I hear this and I think to myself, this is just crazy to even comprehend.
I know. I sound like an insane person. I sound like an insane person, but that's how it is. There's a lot more fluidity. But because they are spirits or entities, they are able to conceptualize things in a different way. They are able to see all of the complexities that create what we know as our world. And time is inconsequential to them. So, that man may have been possessed for 50 years in our time, but it could have been, 5 minutes in that entity's existence. Or it could have been, 10,000 years. We don't really know, because it's not of consequence to them.
We went on a ghost walk, my wife and I. We went on a ghost walk, I don't know, probably 8 years now, 9 years, something like that. We was on vacation. It was in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Right.
And it was so cool. It was I love it. I love history. And we're going from location to location to location. And I'll never forget, we go to the 4th location. As we're walking up, I just get sick. Like, I don't feel good. I almost feel dizzy. I felt like my stomach was just going to explode. And I told my wife, I said, hey, just go on a little bit. I'm going to stay back a little bit. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to get sick in front of other people, if that makes sense.
Right.
And it was a little bit later, she comes back over to me. She goes, hey, the tour guide was just talking, because he gives a little bit of history lesson. And he said, it's not uncommon for people who are, and he used the terminology, sensitive, to get sick at this location. And I don't know if she said something to him or if he made the reference that anyone that gets that way, if you walk, I think it's like 15 yards that way, you'll be fine.
Mm-hmm.
And when she told me this, I'm like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Like, in my mind, I'd had like a hot dog, one of those hot dogs where it's like, it might be a questionable hot dog here. Okay. But lo and behold, we walked 15 foot away and I was completely fine. Now, the fascinating part about that spot was in Wilmington, it is a port that would come in. So people that would oftentimes go out to sea, if there was a mutiny or pirates and they captured them, they would bring them back. And that was the courthouse and the execution site. They would be hung on site.
Got it.
So I guess for me, my question is, being so that I was fine after I got whatever this distance was, it became my thought process, okay, maybe I am sensitive to whatever this is. Mm-hmm. But what causes that? And maybe you don't know the answer to this, but I know some psychic mediums, from what I hear, they also become nauseous depending on certain areas that they can go into. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure you've probably done some type of research or you have some kind of broad understanding that I don't have. What would cause something like that if you do know that?
Yeah. So, I mean, first I want to address that everybody has a level of sensitivity. There is a very well-known medium that I respect very much. I've taken classes from her. Her name is Cindy Keza. And she says, everybody can learn to play the piano, but not everybody's going to be a concert pianist. And so, the fact that you experience that, yes, you're sensitive, but that doesn't mean that, you have mediumistic abilities. It just means you're a little more tuned in to what's going on. And as far as, being made physically sick and things like that, that's actually pretty common. It's happened to me before where I feel the pain or something that somebody suffered. So, I've experienced like getting shot in the chest. I've experienced head trauma. I've experienced really horrible abdominal pains. There were 2 little girls that I picked up on. They died of diphtheria. So I felt that like closing of the throat. So, that's really common. And if that particular area is really sort of bathed in that kind of energy, that kind of energy will stick around. So you're picking up on remnants of the past, essentially. It is a residual energy of things that occurred in that place.
See, I almost took that as completely different. I almost took it, and I guess I'm glad we're having this conversation now. The way I perceived it was there was so much evil there that's what may have made me sick. I never thought of the aspect of maybe it was what people could have felt, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah. Oftentimes anytime we experience something that we interpret as negative, our minds go to, oh, that's something evil. That's something bad. But that's not necessarily the case. I say if something scares you, it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that's your reaction to whatever it is. So just because you're experiencing, nausea, headaches, things like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're being attacked. It could very much be that you are just experiencing what other people experienced. So, I always err on the side of give a little grace to the experience, because the negative is less common in my experience.
And obviously when Emily is talking about fear, she's not talking about Bert, okay? Because Bert is never really scared. There's always a constant level of calm against popular belief, okay? When we do these paranormal investigations, I will not be scared, okay? If there's cut in camera sequences, It's not based on fears. We probably got to exchange a battery out or something like that. Just FYI for future investigations. Okay. So yes, I'm glad you brought that up for our listeners and viewers that might be scared of certain things. Okay.
Yep.
So that's always good. Another thing that I do find fascinating is in which there's certain psychic mediums or clairvoyants that I've seen in other shows or videos or even in the paranormal realm. One of those that I find absolutely fascinating and I would kill to talk to this person is someone like Chip Coffey.
Love Chip.
Absolutely fast. Like, I think Chip Coffey is the first guy that I watched and I said, there's something to this. And I don't know what it is, but there's something to this because he picks up on things that I would have never assumed he would be able to pick up on. And one thing that I find fascinating whenever I listen to clairvoyants or psychic mediums is I want to say expectation, but not necessarily their expectation, their sense of what happens when someone passes on or their views on that. For you personally, what is your views when someone does pass on? Is it because we did a podcast episode recently on Deceptive Reality, the other podcast. And one of the things that we talked about, and it was me that brought it up, I found this research. Apparently, it's two parts. The first one is when we sleep, there's a activation in our brain that allows for mobility of feet, hands. So in my mind, and then there's the secondary thing that then makes it so we're basically in some form of paralysis or paralyzed. So we don't use that. What our brain's opening up, we're not allowed to use it. But then I sit there and I think, okay, are we going to a different dimensional plane in our dreams? And is that why it's opening up that gate? And the secondary thing is when we pass away, there's so much brain activity that's occurring. And I almost look at that almost like a download, like we're being downloaded to a different realm, so to speak. That's the generic way of basically saying, I'm sure what's happening. But it makes me wonder, for you being a psychic medium, like what's your views on obviously the life? And then for those that pass on afterlife, what do you believe happens based on these entities that you've spoke to?
Yeah. So again, it's not really a straightforward answer. And I think that's something that people have a hard time accepting with, dealing with the spiritual realm, the paranormal and things like that. Is none of it is as straightforward as we would like it to be. It's non-scientific in that way, which is why it's paranormal. But some of it has to do with the way in which the person died. So in the vast majority of cases, what happens is, from my perception, is that you're greeted by somebody that you recognize, trust, and love. And they help you transition from physical form to spirit form and then forward into the next realm of being. There are instances where if people die suddenly or tragically, they kind of get lost. So those are spirits that, are a little bit stuck in our realm. They haven't fully transitioned. So if you've heard of mediums, helping spirits move on and things like that, that's what that is. That's a spirit that for some reason didn't go through the transition process. And again, that's usually, in my experience, tragic, sudden deaths. But even in those instances, it's not always the outcome. So, if, I don't want people that are listening to this, to think that, oh, well, my, friend who was murdered, like their spirit is stuck. That's not necessarily true. Again, the transition process is sort of like a well-oiled machine. But every now and then something goes a little wrong. So that's kind of, I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question to answer. Like, in some of these are going to be, I like to say it all the time for those of you that's listening at home or on your commute, you know, the thing that I can't remember, there was a psychic medium that I used to watch. She had blonde hair, short blonde hair, super funny. She had a TV show for a moment. She had said something that stuck with me for years also. Oh, Long Island, man, what's her name?
Long Island medium?
Yes.
Teresa Caputo.
I forget what her name is. I should know her name, but I can't remember it.
Teresa Caputo.
That's it. Yes. She had said something a long time ago, and it's always stuck with me. And the way that she explained it is, a lot of times spirits don't, or entities is what I'm going to use. Entities don't necessarily care what we want to know. They just have something to provide. So yes, we're only limited to what they want us to know. And sometimes I go back and I think it's probably because there's things that we're not supposed to know.
Yes.
So it's like, if someone says, hey, don't tell X, Y, and Z, you're not going to hear it. And it's probably the same thing. They have, I'm sure, rules that put guardrails on what they can tell us and what they cannot.
Mm-hmm. There's also, this concept of what can we understand as humans. Our brains function in a very specific fashion. And, I often see things that I just I don't understand. I don't get how it works. All I know is that it has some basis in reality because I wouldn't be seeing it otherwise. Again, it takes energy for spirits to communicate, even with mediums. We make it easier, but, they have a specific purpose, and they're not just like sitting around doing nothing on the other side. They have their own lives. I like to say, I'm like, life continues. They've got their spirit jobs, they've got their hobbies, they, have friends and things like that. So, we really do hear what they want us to hear and see what they want us to see. And it's only through a lot of practice and experience that mediums are able to see past that, dig out a little bit more information, see them in different forms, things like that. So there's definitely, it's just like, I can't make you say something you don't want to say.
Sure.
I can't make them say something they don't want to say.
Technically enough money, you can make me say things I don't want to say. So
I don't have that kind of money. I'm sorry.
I feel your pain. Listen, this is why I can't get anyone to say what I want them to say either. So don't feel bad. One thing that I guess, and I know just dealing very limited in what I deal with, and I do deal with this somewhat too, which is the skepticism or the disbelief in some things. And I think that's why a lot of people are, and I'm sure even for you, why you didn't necessarily come out right away. It's a very tough thing to deal with when you're dealing with being critiqued, or you're being with skepticism or disbelief. How do you deal with that in your day-to-day? Because you've put yourself out there, like even on Reddit, I can see you've put yourself out there somewhat. And listen, we all know that the Reddit machine can be a very harsh environment sometimes. How do you deal with that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, the first thing is that I like to say is that I still consider myself a skeptic. Just because something unexplainable happens, you've got to investigate it. Don't immediately jump to, oh, there's a spirit. Well, did the furnace turn on? Did the AC turn on? Are your walls thin and you're hearing something, through that, very much, rule out reality, or not reality, rule out living scientific explanations. And, I don't think a lot of people realize that even a medium can have that kind of thought process. Not everything is a ghost, not everything is a spirit. And, even when I'm seeing something, I rely on certain factors and requirements that I have for communicating with spirit that help me, determine if I'm really getting what I'm getting, especially if it's something that, makes no sense. So, for example, I've had spirits where they say something that I'm like, that doesn't... I don't understand what you mean by that. And so I ask them, they have to repeat the same thing 3 times. And it has to come into my head 3 times. And I won't say it unless that's done. I'm also very cognizant of, what does my internal voice sound like? And so when I'm getting somebody else's, I can be very clear, that's not me, that's somebody else. And as far as dealing with skeptics, I mean, I love to have conversations with them when they are respectful. And I think that goes for anybody in any conversation. It's the people that, are immediately like, well, you're insane, you're schizophrenic, you're a liar, you're preying on people who are in who are grieving, easily manipulated, want to believe. That's the kind of stuff that I've learned to just kind of shut out. Just kind of, this is actually, there's a drag queen that I really like that was on RuPaul's Drag Race, and they would say the phrase water off a duck's back. Mm-hmm. So, the comment just rolls off you because, I know I'm not crazy. I know I'm not preying on people who are in a vulnerable state. I know that what I'm getting is real. And, if people don't want to believe it, they don't have to. That's
the way I look at everything. I tell people all the time, like a prime example, when I was young, in that woman that I saw, which now is believed to be, my great grandmother. I didn't bring that up because people looks at you like, okay, well, you clearly have something wrong, up in the brain, or, and I don't think I've ever brought this up on this podcast. Surprisingly, when we started doing these podcasts, activity inside my house increased. Well, should I say, we had no activity inside my house. And then once we started the podcast, we started having activity in the house, or what I deem to have activity. Now, I don't play into it. I don't try to expand it, but it does happen. And surprisingly enough, the bulk of it happens around October, right before Halloween, when we're doing that episode that we do every year. And it's happened the last 2 years. Most recently, and this one kind of shocked me. I'd never had this before in my entire life, but I was in the kitchen. I was talking to my wife, and we were joking around about something. I can't remember what we was joking around. And, I like to joke around and have fun. And I was backing up. And when I was backing up, I felt like a small hand push against my back to the point to where the fabric on my shirt touched, but like in the center. So the outside of the shirt, it's hard to explain. It's really hard to explain, but
I've actually experienced something very similar. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
And it's so weird when you experience, and we sometimes will leave the vacuum inside the kitchen, and it's got a very weird, it's like a circular handle. Mm-hmm. So my first thought is, okay, I'm about to trip over this. So I kind of like stumbled to go around it. And when I turned around, there was no vacuum. Now we also have a young child, and obviously they weren't there either. So for the next probably 5 minutes, I'm sitting there trying to arrange my shirt to try to figure out how I felt, what I felt. And I think what I find so interesting is, like, if I tell someone else that conversation and they have zero belief system, they go, you might want to get your head checked because that's not normal. Like you experience, but for me, it's like that was as real as a real hand at that point for me. Yep. And no one can ever tell me that what I felt is not what I felt. Now, like what we talked about earlier, especially what you talked about. I actually have a video coming out today when we're recording this, and the video is going to be on YouTube only, but the video is entitled, I think I entitled it something like, "Is My House Haunted?" And what I talk about is, you know, if you have, and it's more of like a question and answers kind of thing, like, hey, you know, if you believe your house is haunted, you might want to do this, you might want to do that. And one of the big things that I talk about is trying to prove that what you think is there is not there first.
Yes.
So by that, you know, and it's funny that you brought this up, because it's literally some of the things I brought up in the video. Is probably the biggest thing that will make you believe something is your own mind. You know, if you believe that it's a ghost in your mind, it's very hard to sell yourself on the fact that it's not a ghost.
Right.
You know? And unfortunately, exactly. that's just being human. That's human nature. That's, to a degree, that's kind of a protective thing for us, right? We're trying to protect ourselves.
Yep.
So I definitely understand what you're saying when you come from the standpoint of, hey, maybe just, and especially when we do these investigations next year, there's the spots we're going to are very active locations. Okay. Mm-hmm. The Hinsdale house is probably by far the top 5 most haunted locations in the entire US.
Yeah, I would be scared to go there.
Yeah, because the interesting thing about the Hinsdale house, and most people don't know this, and I have my own theories on this, and I may be wrong, but there's a lot of physical things. There's not necessarily as much audible or EVPs. It's more of the experience that you have. I did an interview, and as a friend of mine, his name is Link. He runs Link Dandy Paranormal.
Okay.
And he talked about the first time he was there, and there was nothing. He was mad. He was frustrated. And he was like, this is supposed to be a haunted location. They got everything set up. They go to bed that evening. As he's laying down in bed, he hears someone walking on the porch. And then he hears the doorknob turning, which there is not uncommon for people to just walk up. They've heard the story and they want to see, is it haunted? So he's like, man, someone's here. I can't believe that. Like, he's getting ready to kick it out. And then he goes, oh, wait a second. Or no, I'm sorry. I messed that up. The doorknob was turning, but there was no steps on the porch, which you would hear.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there and he's like, man, someone's here. And then he thought to himself, well, wait a second. I didn't hear anyone walk up to that door and I would have heard it.
Yeah.
So for him, he's like, well, I've read about this. This is clearly ghosts. And he said he went right to sleep. Whereas me, I've gotten up. I've been like, what is going on? I got to see what's happening here. But he was just more calm. He had read it. He knew that was going to be the thing. But the next morning when he woke up, he had scratches on his thighs. And a very interesting thing that he talked about, for all of you listening, I'm going to apologize. I'm using my hand right now. But if someone was to bite your hand, you would see the bite print almost be, it was the opposite direction. So it was like it bit from the inside of the hand outward.
Okay.
So you have more experiences like that there. So my thought process is, I don't believe that that is demonic. I don't believe that it was a previous person. My thought process on that entire thing is it's elemental, which is things that were here before any of this other stuff. And, you know, I don't know what your theories on elementals are, if you believe there's something else. That's just my own thought process. But I find it interesting that those kind of stories exist. And then you hear that stuff and you go, again, that's crazy. But he has photographic evidence of, hey, this is what happened to me.
Yeah. So on elementals, I wholeheartedly believe they exist. I actually have one that is outside of my current residence. And there's many non-human entities that are in that class, I would say. And, you know, when it comes to things like, you know, scratches and bite marks and physical attacks, I mean, obviously, you know, it's terrifying. It's not pleasant. But, you know, it's another thing where you have to think about it in layers. You know, we immediately go to something negative. But, you know, he heard this doorknob and he didn't go investigate. Somebody was trying to get his attention. And And, spirit doesn't necessarily know its own strength. And so in an effort to get his attention, did they unintentionally cause him harm, physical harm? That is something that can happen. They don't mean to, it just kind of happens. It could be something negative. It could be something that truly wished to do him harm. And it could be something non-human as well. It can be all of those things. That's where, you have to stop and think about the situation. What are the chain of events leading up to this? What do we know about this haunting and the spirits that are there? Really break it before we go to, this is something negative. Give a little grace and say, all right, well, what happened here? I don't know enough about the spirits at the Hinsdale house to say for sure, but, just based on the course of events that you just described, he heard this door handle jiggling, and then he was just like, oh yeah, this happens, and then went to bed. Somebody may have been trying to get his attention. He'd been wanting something all night. He hadn't gotten it. He was frustrated. So he's finally getting something. He ignores it. That would be frustrating. And so they're trying to get his attention, and in doing so, inadvertently cause him harm.
Which makes sense. Now, something that I find interesting whenever I talk about psychic mediums or clairvoyance, I know there's different levels also. There's people that are audible. There's some people that's visual. Sometimes they have combinations of both.
Yep.
For you, and we're only speaking about you because, again, everyone is different. Is there like specific rituals or like a routine that you have to do to kind of get you into that thought process of, hey, I'm now able to connect? Or is it someone like the Long Island medium that she says that she's always on, and then she puts her hat on to kind of be like, hey, I'm turning this off now? How does that work specifically for you?
Yeah, so I go through a process that I like to call opening and closing. So if I'm going into a situation where I know I'm going to be connecting with spirit, so like going into a reading or going on an investigation, something like that, I go through kind of a meditative process of, really opening myself up. I describe it as like, turning the open sign on a storefront. I'm open for business. I'm open to communicate. And then, when I'm done with that, I essentially do the same process backwards, and it's like turning the closed sign. Like, I'm not, open for communication right now. I'm just living my life. Because otherwise I get inundated. It's just like people are constantly coming, and, you wouldn't want just random people coming into your house asking you questions all the time. And that's essentially what it's like. But that doesn't mean that I don't sense things. I'm still very aware if there's a spirit around, and I can do what I call tap in, where I just like kind of quickly, poke my head in the door, get information, and, continue with my day. So in that sense, yes, I'm always aware. I'm always open, but there are certain times when, I intend to be keyed in.
Now, we kind of touched on this earlier, and I really wanted to ask then, but then I sidetracked myself because that's what I do around here. Okay. When you connect with a spirit or an entity, and earlier we was talking about, maybe sometimes there's information that they can provide or that they're, I'm going to say, not allowed to provide, right? Like there's certain information that they just don't want us to have. Has there ever been a time that you've connected, someone has asked you a question and the spirit's like, nope, I'm just not going to give you that information? Did they, almost as though they don't want that information out for whatever the reason?
Oh, all the time. So there seems to be this misconception. I try to explain this when I do book readings with people, that somehow a medium is all knowing, all seeing, but we're human. And, I get questions like, well, what does this person think of me? And, I say, that's not something that I do. Okay, well, what do their spirit guides say about what they think? And it's kind of like, that's an invasion of privacy, they're not going to tell you that information. Or it's a situation where, part of the lesson in this is patience. So they're not going to give you the answer to that. Or, it's just simply, they don't think it's important. So, they're just not going to talk about it. They're like, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for this purpose. So, I definitely get pushback. I always say it's just like talking to another living person. They can push back on you and say, that's not a topic that I want to delve into.
I think people look at, and myself no differently, I'm sure in some capacities, they look at psychic mediums almost as though it's like, what was those machines that you would put your quarter in that gives you the ticket, and there's that guy with the crystal ball.
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about. I can't think of what it's called.
And someone in my comments is going to yell at me and go, oh, how do you not know this? You owned one. I'm like, I know. But, I think that's the perception, is that you're tapping into almost like the spiritual chat GPT, so to speak,
right.
And you know it all. But it all comes down to, again, what I guess the spirit on the other side or the entity on the other side finds important in the conversation. They hold the keys, right? There's certain things they're not going to provide. Now, I know for me personally, there's information that I would never want out as a human. That to think that miraculously when I get to the other side, that's not the case. I think that's kind of a very narrow-minded way of thinking of the individual or the entity that you're dealing with on the other side. Now, one thing that I also find interesting, and this came from an interview that I did with John, who is a paranormal investigator. And for anyone that doesn't know, after this podcast, if you find this interesting, go watch that interview for sure. He does investigations, but he lost his brother a few years before, or should I say, I guess multiple years before. But when he lost him, he's all about trying to prove that the paranormal is real. And he employs all these scientific methods that are fascinating, and he has amazing results. But one of the most amazing results is he has pictures of his brother from the other side. And it's his brother communicates through spirit boxes, and it's his voice. Like if you listen to the spirit box and you listen to video from his brother years ago, same voice, which is fascinating. Now, one of the things that, and definitely check out his channel. I feel like I'm tagging everyone at this point. I'm going to put his information in the description down below too. But one of the things that he found fascinating was his brother Jeremy, and he did an not investigation, but almost like a scientific method. What he did, he put a recorder in his bedroom and he had a recorder in the car. And he said, I want you to be in my bedroom and I want you to communicate with me, and I'm going to drive away from the house. What his goal was to see if his brother was stuck to that location or if it was almost like a plane. Now, what's interesting is as he drove, however far, I can't remember how far he said he drove, but as he drove away, he picked up the same recording on the two recorders, but the one in the car was not as strong as the one in the bedroom. And almost the way that he explained that is, it's almost like having a walkie-talkie. The farther that you get away from the source, the less you're going to pick it up. Now, a lot of times people will be like, oh, is that this cemetery and the spirit of such and such is in the cemetery? It oftentimes makes me wonder if, again, similar to like time we talked about earlier, if maybe there's no dimensional plane where they're stuck in one location. They're kind of everywhere at the same time, which is why you're able to connect, but maybe they're hundreds or tens of thousands of miles away. Is that kind of your perception also? Or do you believe they're kind of locked in a place and then they like teleport to whatever?
No, they are. So again, it's time and space. So, space is not an issue for them. So spirits can be in more places than one at a time. They can be in multiple places at a time. That's what I'm trying to say. It doesn't matter how near or far they are. They can communicate. I'm able to do something called remote viewing, which means that I can pick up on locations that are far away. I'm not like, I can be sitting here and pick up on what's going on in a friend's house. And I can communicate with those spirits, even though, they're hundreds of miles away. So that's not really an issue. Now, some mediums don't have that ability as strongly. They really do need to be kind of in the same space. But it's again, the way things work in the living dimension does not work the same way where they are. So with few exceptions of being trapped in locations or places, they can really go wherever they want.
Then I watch shows like a psychic medium, I think his name's Tyler. Tyler, I think. He's like the celebrity.
That's
psychic medium.
That's Matt. I've seen him actually. I've been to a gallery reading of his.
I'm probably butchering all these people. I apologize. If you are watching this and I butchered you, I apologize. I'm really sorry. I'm not as well versed. Okay. Emily's getting me well versed with this. We're catching up a little bit. I thought for the life of me, his name was like Tyler something. Celebrity. I'm going to look this up so I don't butcher it. I'm sorry, Tyler, if you're watching this or listening to this. Tyler. Sworn. Oh, yeah. Tyler Henry.
Oh, okay. That's a different one.
He's a strapping young male. Look at him. He's so strapping. One thing that he does that I find so fascinating is he'll always ask someone, do you have an object that you want me to touch? And when he grabs it, and of course, my mind, being someone who's not well versed, I think Harry Potter Horcrux. Okay. Horcrux action going on right there. Mm-hmm. But when he touches it, it's almost like he connects with whatever energy was in that thing. And one fascinating thing that he does, he sits there in the books and he just scribbles on that book. And he says it's his way of linking into whatever that other side is. And he did an interview with, or a reading for, I think it was Steve-O. And when he did the interview with Steve-O, Dr. Drew, do you know who Dr. Drew is?
Yes.
Dr. Drew worked with an agency that put this brainwave mask on him. And what they found was when he was just talking normal, his brainwave showed one thing, but when he started scribbling and talking, a completely different part of his brain opened up, which was fascinating. They almost said that the part of his brain that opened up was the same part of our brain that opens up when we dream. Yep. Which takes me back to the whole dreaming conversation, right? Like maybe we go somewhere and we're able to walk and all that, but we still have interconnections with our body in some capacity. But do you find that true if you grab something or you hold something, whatever energy might be there, it helps you with potentially navigating, connecting with that specific person?
Yeah, so that's actually another specific ability. If I recall, it's called psychometry. Please, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. While I am a medium, I'm not necessarily an expert in all things. But yes, that's the ability to touch an object and gain insight on what that object has been around and experienced. I have done it a little bit. It's not my area of expertise. So that's something that, yes, mediums can do. You can pick up on the energy that object has absorbed throughout its existence. And then the scribbling I want to touch on as well, scribbling in the book. So that is called automatic writing. And that is actually, you're allowing the spirit to essentially control your hand and write for you. And you can compare like handwriting, so like how you normally write, and then doing automatic writing, and the handwriting will be different. But it's just another way to get more information. I don't do that. I get very freaked out allowing spirit to control my physical form. But for some people, that is, one of their go-tos is allowing a spirit to do the writing for them.
Yeah, Bert would not be cool with that, just FYI. Yeah, totally. I can barely control myself sometimes. Having someone else control me is super scary. Okay, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Earlier we talked about the realm, right? Or at least I talked about the realm. Realms, dimensional planes. When you make these connections, do you feel as though they're pulled into, I'm going to use the word realms. Do you feel like they're pulled more into our realm, or do you feel like they pull you more into their realm? Or a combination of both, maybe it's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, it kind of depends. When I'm doing a reading for somebody, so say you wanted a reading with me, we're having a conversation. It's more like I'm pulling them into the conversation. In other instances where I'm tapping into something that's nearby, sometimes it is them kind of pulling me more into their perception and reality, especially in instances where like I'm seeing what they're seeing. So that's again, it's situational. And I like to say that I have 1 foot in this dimension and 1 foot in the other, and I'm a bridge between the two. So, sometimes the bridge leans one way and sometimes the bridge leans the other, just depending on the specific situation.
That makes sense. Now, when you're having these, I'm going to say conversations, right? When you're having these conversations with the other side, do you notice almost like a commonality as far as a theme or a specific topic that seems to come up over and over again? Like, let's use, for example, do you think that there's like a commonality between the spirits having that conversation back with their loved one that is more common? Like we talked about earlier, I look for themes, right? If I see the same thing over and over again, I put validation. I go, okay, is the spirit realm like, hey, I think of like, we just had Christmas. I think of like Scrooge and the 3 ghosts that come back, and they're like, Bob Marley's like, we got to get this to Scrooge and tell him that there's like in the spirit realm, when someone passes on, do you think that they try to get a message back to their loved one that's common between all the people? Or do you think it's just completely different depending on the person?
There are definitely messages that I get that are more common than others. The biggest one is that they're fine. They're okay. If they were sick or hurting, they are no longer suffering from that. I get people who they had dementia. They've got their memories back. They remember things. So a lot of consolation, honestly. And for me, actually, those are the messages that, while they can be the most healing, I don't like giving them, because it's like anybody can say that. Sure, it's not something that I necessarily couldn't have known. I want to say a little trigger warning here, but spirits who have passed from a message that I get, that I've gotten every time I have spoken with them, is the regret. and not realizing how many people cared for them, and not wanting people to feel guilty, that they should have done this or should have done that. That I get that every single time with those spirits. So, I mean, those are really the big ones. But, it is very different because they're different people. They're trying to get across different messages. Trying to think if there's anything else that's like, I see it repeated. They will make comments on things on current events. I did a reading for a girl where her mother was like, so what's with the tattoos? Like, she didn't have tattoos when her mother passed, and now she's got all of these tattoos, and she's like, what is this? You get that kind of like semi-disapproving mom thing. So engaging with current events also, again, it's just like having a conversation with someone who's alive. They're still people.
This is probably the most important question I'm going to ask you. Are they watching me in the shower? Like, what's going on there? Do they respect my privacy when the bathroom door is closed?
Yeah. So again, they're people. They know our social norms. So, they do give us privacy.
Yes.
There are instances where, spirits who are, trying to scare, trying to, make you feel uncomfortable, impede on that. That's happened. I'm sure people have heard stories where they feel like they're being watched in the bathroom or in the shower. But your day-to-day spirit, like your family and friends and things like that, they're not following you into the bathroom. They're not watching you in bed. They're not like, they don't do that. They weren't interested in it in life. They're not interested in it in death either.
I mentioned it because I did a story, I think it was a few weeks ago now, and the woman had it was actually the sister to the protagonist in the story. She was in the shower, and it was a haunted location in the shower, curtain wrapped around her. So, of course, now that becomes my theme. Okay, they're in the bathroom with me. Like, what's going on? So,
they can, but if they are, they're doing it on purpose.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Everyone, I'm sure, wants someone to come through, right? Like, I feel like I know. If I ever had a reading, one person for sure would come through. And it's just because in my life, that person was significant. Like, that person was always there. So I assume in passing, the same thing would occur. Is there ever a time when you do a psychic reading for somebody and they're really hoping someone comes through when you try to connect? Have you ever been like completely shut off from that spirit and they're like, no, I don't want this interaction. I don't want to do this. I don't understand how the side works. So I don't.
Yeah. So, I preface all of my readings by saying, I can't force spirit to come forward. If they don't want to engage, or they don't feel they have a reason to engage, they won't. I can try. I can always try connecting with that energy. And sometimes I'm successful, but it's just like if you and me, if you decide you're done talking to me and you hang up and you stop recording, it's the same with them. They don't want to talk. It doesn't mean that they're not there, or that they don't care, that they're upset. They just, for whatever reason, their messages aren't the ones that you need to hear right now.
Sure. I know this person, for me, they wouldn't let someone else talk. I'm like 95% sure they wouldn't let someone else talk from the other side. So,
and that's the other thing. If somebody has really, really big energy and you're trying to connect with somebody that is, more subdued, it can be really difficult, because that big energy, it's squeaky wheel gets the grease. That big energy is so easy to pick up on. It's so easy to hear. It's very clear. And the quieter energy, it's like struggling to get a word in edgewise.
For sure. And, that's true in real life too, right? Like you always have that one person that's extremely loud and you're like, gosh, I wish they had something else to do right now, because I can't talk to X, Y, and Z. So now we kind of touched on this earlier too. I know I keep ping ponging us around a little bit. We did talk about almost like evil, I'm going to say evil or malevolent entities also. Now, I know you said that you've touched into some of those before in the past. When you've encountered something like that, can you describe the differences between that and, let's say, the average run-of-the-mill entity or ghost or spirit that you've encountered? What's the big difference? Like, are they trying to make a connection more so on their own? Is it a case where you have a completely different feeling or approach with that? And then how do you pull away from that kind of negative experience?
Yeah, so it is very similar to feeling out the difference between a person. You can talk to somebody and they seem perfectly nice and wonderful, but you just have that gut feeling that, they're not good. Similar with negative entities. As I said before, I have encountered a demon before, and the appearance of this demon was not, like red skin and horns and fire and brimstone. They appeared as a young, very attractive man. But again, their actions weren't particularly friendly. Over time, it became very clear, what this was. And sometimes the way that I, try and figure out what things are is I try to figure out what scares them as well. And so, I started thinking about my religion, about Christianity and things like that. And it backed off a little bit. So that's where I said, okay, so this is, a Abrahamic type demonic entity. And I pull away from them in the same way that I pull away from other spirits, just much more strongly. So, where I might, gently put a hand on your shoulder and kind of push you back and say, I really need my space. You're in my bubble. This would be a shove, a hard shove. And that is done on an energetic level. Sometimes I do accompany it with a physical action just because it's easier to visualize that. It kind of gives it more strength, but, it's also about, how do you prepare yourself for that situation? So I have protections for myself that are up all the time. So if something happens that I'm not expecting, I at least have a line of defense. But it's about being prepared, really, for anything, because you don't necessarily know what you're walking into at any given point.
You said something that caught my attention, because you spoke of your own Christianity in that. And for anyone that knows my channel, I don't necessarily hide it. I don't dive into it very much, but I also have a Christianity background. I've went as far as to go into apologetics and understanding all the key things. And for me, it fits me, and it's not for everyone. And I totally understand that. I'm respectful of all people and religions, and you can believe what you want to believe. That just happens to be mine.
Right.
Now, I find it interesting because when we talk about, let's use, for example, the other side, right? Or other dimensional planes and realms. And especially when you look at Christianity, or you look at, let's use, for example, anything that's going to use the Torah as a background or as a conduit, let's say, right? And we talk about heaven and stuff like that. Obviously, you're going to be limited to what you're going to know because, again, There's going to be information that you're just never going to receive. It just doesn't happen that way. But being a psychic medium, does it strengthen your faith, having what you can perceive in your own life to say, okay, there's something to this. There's something real. There's something with Christianity, right? Like if you're a Christian, then there's the whole belief of Jesus Christ dying for our sins. And then, you know, that's our middleman is how I put it, between there and here. Did that strengthen it with the psychic medium abilities? And has it maybe complicated it to a degree, because there's like here's a great example, and I can only use an example that I can think of off the top of my head, because you kind of sprung that on me. I didn't expect that.
Sorry.
That's okay. Hey, listen, this is why I prefer everyone has, listen, I don't mean this in a facetious way, anyone that listens. There's podcasts that have preset questions. I hate it. I just like having a conversation and see where it leads us. So sometimes these things come up and I'm like, gosh, like I would have never thought to even ask about that. So it's great. I love it. But sometimes I don't have an opportunity to think my thought all the way through. I think the thought process is, when you're a Christian or you come from a Muslim faith or, you know, I mean, you technically go into even like Buddhists and stuff of that, you know, the thought process is we live, we die, and then we go to one of two places. But then when we talk about the realms that I am in and you're in with the paranormal, where, well, listen, now we're talking to someone that's supposedly here. How does that fit into our realm? I always explain it as in, I can be a Christian and believe these other aspects because I don't necessarily know that there's a cutoff. I believe that there could be energies, and that's even when I tap into, well, there's residual energies. It's not even cognitive of what's going in our own realm. It's an energy or a source. I also listen, you're going to hate me for this, and I apologize. I also don't necessarily subscribe that we don't live in a simulation also. So listen, I'm somewhere in the middle there. Okay. Which can explain some of those things away too. Now my Christians are like, great, he's a simulation guy too.
No, look, when you're a medium, it's at this point, I'm like, anything could be possible. I don't know.
Sure.
Like, you stop being surprised.
Yes.
But as far as being Christian, I mean, it has strengthened my faith. You know, because I've seen things and experienced things. You know, I actually have a close relationship with one of the archangels. So, you know, that has been validating. At the same time, it's also made me a lot more understanding and empathetic of other people's religions that are different from mine. Because, you know, I haven't seen any evidence of, you know, only Christians get to go to a place that is peaceful and happy. I, with the exception of that one demon that I've come across, I've not seen any evidence of hell. You know, so, and I don't want to say I've perceived heaven, because I haven't. But I haven't seen like people getting kicked out, you know, as Christianity would have us believe. So it's much, I say this all the time, it's much more complicated than we know. It's much more complicated than any one religion could possibly, you know, explain. It's beyond our understanding, which is why we don't have something that explains all of it. And it's why I don't fully understand how it works. But Christianity is what resonates with me most. And so, you know, that's why that's my faith. If, you know, Buddhism, it jives with somebody else, then, you know, there's a reason for that. I don't know what that reason is. But, you know, it's made me a lot more empathetic, I think. You know, there is no one right way.
You know, some things in the Bible is tongue in cheek. It's not necessarily meant as in this is us talking about. And technically, if you look at terminology of hell, though it does reference the gnashing of teeth and stuff of that equivalent. There's also the part of it where it talks about an absence of being near God. So what I sit back and I say, there's not really anything that says there's a true place called hell. I would assume that if the heaven part of it is real and there is a greater being that you're supposed to serve, and you're not doing that, now there's an absence of whatever that lifestyle is. There could potentially be suffering or gnashing of teeth or frustration. So I always try to tell people, because being on this side, sometimes people's like, well, if you're a Christian, then you believe that people's in this fiery pit of hell and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I feel like the nuance of just putting it in such a small box,
right,
is not the way to look at it. I would almost look at it as a much more broad terminology than what we can even conceive. It's like, we talk about prophetic messages or people that has told the future. They can only see it through the very narrow scope of how they're able to witness it, right? So it's like, if someone tells me, well, let's say I'm able to see the future 200 years from now. Well, you talk to someone 200 years from today in the past, there's no way they could explain the things that we deal with today. They can only use the observation of what they had then.
Right.
So, to say that there's these places or not these places, I find it a fascinating conversation. But I think for the average listener that probably listens to this podcast or watches on YouTube, there's at least a comfort level of knowing there's something at least on the other side. And I think that's really what I wanted to pinpoint on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, what I like to say when people point to the Bible and the specifics of it, kind of to your point, the Bible's inspired by God, but it's written by human hands. So how much, did Paul really understand of what was being told to him? How much did, Job really understand of what was being said to him? Do we actually understand the concept of what heaven and hell are? Or is it, again, something so beyond our comprehension that we have to tailor it down to something that we can understand, that makes sense in our brains? Because what I have seen, I cannot necessarily truly describe with human words. So it never fully conceptualizes what it is. And I can only imagine that if God were speaking to me, I would only really conceptualize some of it, because some of it would have this worldview that I just have no basis in, no way of comprehending. And, that you have to give it wiggle room. You have to understand that there's a human element to our religions, and we're not going to understand everything, and so I don't think any of it can be truly perfect, a truly perfect translation of what's being said. So
or hear me out here, Emily. Simulation.
Or simulation.
Man, I love it when my guests just follow along with me. That's great. Listen, we're going to another topic. That's as close as I can get. Which is fine.
You know what? Again, nothing would surprise me at this point. So.
Now, something that I would think I'm going to put a preface out there. I do believe in psychic mediums. Okay. I know that there's going to be some listeners that listen to this and they'll be like, man, that's crazy. Whatever. Just listen to the entire conversation. That's all I ask. That said, if psychic mediums are real, and if we're opening doorways and stuff, in which I do believe that is the case, I would assume from time to time there has to be difficult messages that do come through. And we kind of touched on that earlier. I'll probably have to bleep one word out just because the YouTube algorithm hates it. That said, I typically use the terminology of unsubscribe from life. That is probably a very heartbreaking thing to deal with, and especially for John. I know that was how his brother had passed away, and I think all of us within Realm has been touched by somebody who has done something like that, and it's a very difficult thing, I can only assume, for you to receive some of those messages and understand how to give that to your, in this case, client, while still thinking of their well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
With what you do on a daily basis, right? Do you believe that it's more important to have a conversation with people to say, hey, there's something on this other side, this is a spiritual realm or a spiritual world that you can't conceive, and there's someone on the other side that wants to provide a message? Or is your role more personal from a standpoint of, it's more important that I give this message to this person pertaining to this thing? Not necessarily with clients, because clients are coming to you just for that one thing, but I'm going to assume that in your day-to-day life, there's going to be something that's going to sneak through and you're like, I have to give this, like you almost feel as though you have to give a message based on something that's came across. Maybe there's like that one rambunctious, extremely loud spirit that's coming through like, Emily, you got to give this message right now, you know? How do you perceive that? Is it more of you have to explain to someone, hey, there's a spiritual realm and here's the message? Or is it more important to provide the message and let that person figure it out on their own?
I do not give messages to people that I do not know, that like random, like walking through a grocery store and somebody comes through. That's my own personal rule of engagement, is I do not give messages like that, because people really don't want that.
Sure.
They're not prepared for it themselves. It's a very quick way to get somebody mad at you. There are mediums out there that feel like, this is a gift that I've been given. So I must do these things. But just because I can doesn't mean I don't have to also look out for my own benefit. And in the same way, I'm also looking out for their benefit, because they're not expecting to get a message from grandma while they're trying to get, cereal and eggs. It might be that the spirit wants them to get that message, but it's not the right time or place.
Makes sense. Now, I guess bouncing off of that idea, and we kind of touched on this earlier. We've mentioned multiple psychic mediums or clairvoyants in this podcast today so far. The one that I always wanted to see, in a very controversial subject in some realms, John Edwards. I actually had tickets to John Edwards. I bought my mom tickets to John Edwards, and the day that we were supposed to go, his show got canceled and they moved it to another day that I couldn't switch to. Which sucked, because I wanted to see him so bad, but then again, you're in a crowd of like 100 and some people. What's the odds you're going to get picked? But anyway, we talk about like John Edwards, the Long Island medium. We talked about Chip Coffey. And even Tyler, the celebrity, psychic medium. Mm-hmm. Do you believe that? Because I do believe there's a growing popularity when it comes to these mediums that's on television or even paranormal shows, right? Almost every paranormal show has some type of a psychic medium that they have those conversations with that can help them. And, it's a give and take, right? Like a prime example, we're going to start doing paranormal investigations with this channel. Whomever we have on as a psychic medium, even though they're not necessarily a part of the series, they're getting free publicity from it because now they're getting tapped in, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to mention any names. There's some psychic mediums I look at and I go, there's no way this is real. This is all, to put it, lack of coup, it's all BS to me. And I think that and we're talking about some larger paranormal channels. The one that really frustrates me and it really ticks me off, and to no end, like I've received information that I probably shouldn't have received at some. Here's a great example. I'll give you a quick example and then we'll move back to my thought process. I was sleeping one night. I woke up the next morning. I told my wife, I said, hey, your mom is going to be looking for a house. Tell her not to buy the house that she's going to look at. It's got black mold. And then I just went about my day. My wife's like, what in the world are you talking about? It was a few days later. My wife came to me and goes, why did you say what you said? And I said, I don't honestly know. And she said, well, it wasn't my mom looking. It was my dad looking. And the house did have black mold. And I said, okay. But again, that goes back to the conversation you have earlier. Everyone probably has some capability and maybe that comes through, and I don't necessarily understand how that works. The thing that ticks me off, and this is why I don't ever say I have any kind of special abilities or power. I believe quite the opposite. I just think that I fall into a realm of something, and like you said, anyone's capable of it. These paranormal channels that now everyone's a psychic medium. Okay, I can sense there's a guy by the name of Big Jim and he's upstairs and he was hung from a rafter somewhere. It's like, come on, man. Not everyone's a psychic medium. And there's not 5 of you on the team that's not now all psychic mediums. You know, it's very frustrating for me when I see that. Do you think that the growing popularity of those that are on TV shows, those that are in the paranormal realms now, do you think that if anything helps what you do, or do you think that's a hindrance to what you do?
Oh, absolute hindrance. Yeah. Because I know, based on things I see and hear, who's legit and who's not. Yeah. Because there are kind of signs and ways that you can look for. But again, you know, with television, things can always get cut. Things can always get changed. You don't know what kind of background info they have. So you always have to be skeptical. That said, your example of like, there's 5 mediums on the team that can all, if you have 5 mediums on a team, they're not all going to pick up the same thing.
Yeah.
So if you have 5 mediums on a team and they're all picking up the exact same thing in the exact same way, that's bogus. That's planned. Right. You know, everybody's going to pick it up in a different way, and they might not be able to tap into the same spirit for whatever reason. And, you know, because of television, and because the shows that have people faking it are the most popular, because they tend to be the most dramatic and overblown and things like that, you know, it makes people who are legitimate, you know, seem fake. Because when I give a reading, I'm not, you know, losing my mind and screaming and anything like that. It's a normal conversation. And the other thing is that I'm not always right. That's another misconception, is that we're perfect. Another medium that was on a TV show that I really enjoy. Her name is Amy Allen. She said to someone, no one medium is 100% right 100% of the time. And if they are, you should be asking questions about them. So, you know, if you're doing like a paranormal investigation, they might say something that makes no sense, or, you know, that hits wrong because they're interpreting something incorrectly, or it's not coming through right. And in a lot of these shows where again, people are really dramatic and overblown. They're always 100% right. Everything exactly. It's like they read a textbook, you know?
Yeah.
So to me, it's really a hindrance. In some ways it's nice because like more people are seeing that people like me exist. But the shows that people like are not the shows that represent what we do well.
I had a itching suspicion you were going to answer the same way I feel. You know, when Nick and I, the co-host of Deceptive Reality, when we decided we was going to start doing paranormal investigations here in 2025, the one thing I told him is we have to differ from the vast majority of paranormal shows because so much of it is staged and fake. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the paranormal investigation teams that do it, that are legitimate about what they do, most of the time they don't get evidence because that's not how the paranormal works. It's not a light switch when you walk in that you just turn on and it's like, okay, time to perform, folks. It's not a circus. It's not you're asking an entity, whatever it may be, to perform a show for you. And that's not how that works. One of the things that we're going to do, which I've never seen anybody else do. So the mixers that I use for production, the main one that I use is an 8-channel mixer. And what the goal is we're going to put 8 separate mics in the different rooms that we're going to be working in. And we're going to have 8 separate cameras that all record simultaneously. We're going to have our cams that we're going to record on. We're going to do some live events during. Mm-hmm. And where we're going to differ from everywhere else on our website, we're going to put every single piece of equipment on that channel. So for me, the validation is less about proving to you that what I put in my spectacular video that's going to show evidence is there. You can go to the original and you can see if it's been altered, the original files, and you can make that assessment yourself. Yeah. But I think the beautiful part of that is not even necessarily from that, but let's say I'm in, just for intents and purposes, the front room. And we hear a noise and we're like, where's that coming from? Now we have 8 other sources we can go to and go, well, I also heard this in the kitchen, but it's lighter. So you can kind of have a trajectory of where did that initially come from? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually doing something like that is actually a pretty common investigation technique, just plastering the place in cameras and audio equipment. And that's exactly why, because then it can be easier to pinpoint things like that. And then, as far as engaging with psychic mediums in these things, I actually had the pleasure to meet Dave Schrader, who's, well known in the paranormal community. He's been on TV as well. And he is very experienced in working with mediums on paranormal investigations. And I was doing a paranormal investigation with him. And he's like, not to depersonalize someone, but the medium is just another tool. It's no different than your audio equipment. We're kind of the ghost bloodhound. We can direct them in a certain path. So in this instance, he had been through EVP conversing with a female spirit in the home. And I said, Dave, there's a really strong male presence over here, and they are not happy that you're talking with this woman. So he turned and he was able to get EVPs from this male spirit that I had been picking up on. And he asked the question, why don't you want me talking to her? And they got the response that came through was, that's my wife.
Oh, well, there you go.
And the time period of these spirits, it would be like he would kind of need permission from the husband to speak with her. And he hadn't gotten that. So, that's something he wouldn't have known to turn around and like ask that. That's just, I'm picking up on this energy. It's another tool. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because, we don't necessarily think of that when we're doing what we do, So yeah, no, that, I mean, that, if anything, it opens up my thought process on, maybe how to do that kind of stuff in the future. That's actually very interesting.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, working with high profile people like that and what you do, I'm assuming there's got to be a lot of rewarding experiences that you've had as a psychic medium. What do you think is probably the most rewarding experience that you've had?
That's hard. I think it's the instances where I've been able to provide closure, and that kind of consolation, or, provide an insight they wouldn't have otherwise. I had a reading where this girl's mother died when she was very, very young. So she went through puberty and teenage years and all of that, without her mom. And a lot of the message was about like how her mom was there and she was involved and she saw these things and she was with her. And that's so comforting. It takes you back out of that, and I don't need to feel like I missed out on something because she was there. Or instances where they've done things and they're worried that, the spirit of grandpa is going to look down on them, and it's, the message is, no, I don't. I understand. I see the whole picture. Those are really the rewarding ones. They're also the ones where I tend to cry. But giving people that closure, that's why I do what I do, is that I want people to heal. I want people to connect. I want them to grow. I don't want people feeling stuck because they have all of these unanswered questions, and being able to provide that's the most rewarding experience I can get.
That would make sense. If you could ask the spirit realm one question and they had to answer it definitively, what would the question be that you would ask?
Why do you insist on coming when I'm sleeping?
That's a great question. That's a great question.
Why when I'm sleeping? And I don't mean in dreams, but like wake me up out of sleep to talk with me. And that's why I said I have those protections and things in place, because that happens. It's like, you're better off asking me when I'm awake, because if you wake me up at 3 a.m, I'm not going to be a happy person, and I'm less likely to try and help you. It would definitely be nothing grand or mind-boggling. It would absolutely be like, why 1 a.m?
Yeah, I could definitely understand that question. I've not dealt with what you've dealt with, but that would be probably my first question too. Why are you coming to me when I'm trying to get some sleep here? Yeah. As far as from a standpoint for you, and we've covered a lot of bases, I feel like. If there was one thing that you wish more people understood about psychic mediums, what would that be?
That we are human. And I say that, and I've hinted at this in a couple other questions, but I say that broadly because, if we make a mistake, we're automatically assumed to be fakes. If we don't catch on to something right away, we're fakes. But we misinterpret things. We miss something that was really important. We, and to us, it's also a very human experience. Just because I'm a medium doesn't mean that things don't scare me sometimes. Doesn't mean that I'm not unsure of things. I said, I'm not an expert in all of these, fields and things like that. I've done a lot of research, but, it's just because I'm a medium doesn't mean I know everything.
For sure.
I'm constantly learning and evolving, and it also doesn't mean I'm always right. No one who's legit is always right.
Makes perfect sense. I'm going to ask you one more relatively probably complicated question.
Okay.
Brace yourself.
All right.
How do you yourself, personally interpret the meaning of life, given the experiences that you have with your afterlife, speaking with those spirits or entities that's on the other side? Why do you think that we're here? And again, this is a personalized question. It's not like it is the meaning, but what do you, based on what you know from the other side, how do you interpret why we're here?
Yeah, so to me, life is all about lessons. And what is our soul supposed to learn in this lifetime? And unlike most Christians, I do believe in the reincarnation process. I say that we are split up into three beings: our physical being, our spiritual being, and our soul. And they all serve different purposes. But we're here to learn lessons. Things happen in our life for reasons, and the way we respond to them or react to them, is about whether we actually learned from that situation. And that's going to inform our next life, the things that we need to learn and understand. And, so our purpose really is to learn and grow and expand. And, so closed-mindedness is sort of the antithesis to what we're here for.
Makes perfect sense. I think that's a good way to finish the interview. And that's always the way I try to look. I try to look for the one thing that's compounding based off of everything. And I think in a case like yours, that's probably the most important thing, and honestly a good message for everyone if we think about it. I want people to be able to look you up, find you, tell everyone kind of what you do and the best way to get in contact with you. Also, FYI, I forgot where my camera was for like 2 seconds. This is why I can't listen. I can barely do things in the human realm. But in the description down below, we're going to put, I know I've got a list of things we're going to put down there. Hers is going to be first. So wherever she directs you guys to here, don't worry about freaking out if you're driving. Just go to the description when everything's done. It's all going to be there so you can find her super easy. I would love everyone to go check out her info. Also give them your social media accounts. I would love you all to follow her wherever she's at. I'm going to try to sweet talk Emily here into kind of being a consultant for Retraced Echoes and Deceptive Reality from time to time. So this won't be the only time. We've not discussed this, by the way. I'm putting her on the spot right now, but we're gonna use her in the future. So definitely you're gonna want to check out the stuff. But for everyone, what's the easiest way to get in touch with you or consult with you or potentially talk to you? Yeah,
so probably my website is one of those ways. So that's urielsflamescheduling.com. And, that's where if you want to schedule a reading with me, I have a blog on there that I update not as frequently as I should, but I do have a blog there. You can email me, and that's, again, it's urielsflamescheduling@gmail.com. And then on Facebook, it's Uriel's Flame Reiki Healing and Medium Reading, something like that. But Uriel's Flame is always part of the name. So that's how you can find me.
Perfect. Well, again, that's going to be in the description down below. I think that it's important that everyone definitely checks her out. Do you have social media accounts that you use at all?
So the Facebook account, and then I technically have an Instagram.
Twitter machine?
I have Twitter. I don't use it a lot, but I can become a Twitter machine if that's what people want.
You're like me. Listen, I've got everything, Instagram, Twitter. I don't have enough time to do it all. I need a social media person to just handle all my accounts for me. But
my day job is part of it is handling social media. So I kind of get to my personal life and I'm like, ugh.
I don't want to deal with it anymore. Yeah, I feel your pain there. I always said the first things we're going to hire on this channel is going to be a video editor, because I'm tired of doing all that, and social media. Like, if I could just have people to do those two things, I could legit. We could do all kinds of stuff around here. But everything that she's going to give me, I'm going to put it in the description down below. I think that it's important that there's more people that have these conversations, and that there is that understanding. And I think that the service that she provides is by far one that's probably more needed than what people would expect. But thank you so much for coming on. I definitely appreciate it. I think that
thank you for having me.
Oh man, the pleasure's all on this side. I think that there's going to be so many conversations that's going to come from this conversation in the future. And I'm really looking forward to working with you in the future once I've talked you into everything.
Well, it's been great working with you. So I don't think it'll take much convincing.
Perfect. Well, until I see you on the next podcast, goodbye.
She's the keeper of secrets no one else can hear. The voices of the lost, always drawing near. They tug at her mind, they echo like rain. Every soul she connects to leaves a piece of their pain. The world sees her smile, but they don't have a clue. Her shadow's alive with the voices breaking through. She carries their burdens, but they're not her own. She's the bridge they walk to find their way home. They think she's untouchable, a guiding light, but they don't know the battles she fights every night. She keeps her steps steady, she keeps her heart strong, but the whispers never leave, they've been here all along. She hears the whispers in the shadows calling her name. Living in between, yet she's never the same. They follow her closely, they pull her inside, but she's walking her path with the other side. The whispers never stop, they linger in the air. They tell her their stories, their sorrow and fear. Every word they say feels heavy, sincere. She feels their presence when the world's fast asleep. A connection so deep, it's hers to keep. But she's not afraid, she's learned to survive. Every whisper's a reason she's more alive. The world keeps spinning and she walks her line between life and death, where the lost redefine. She's a voice for the voiceless, a bridge for the lost. But every step forward comes at a cost. Her mind is her anchor, her soul's her shield, and she'll keep walking through a battlefield. She hears the whispers in the shadows calling her name. Living in between, yet she's never the same. They follow her closely, they pull her inside, but she's walking her path with the other side. The whispers never stop, they linger in the air. They call her a medium, but she's more than they see. A guide for the restless, setting souls free. She walks in the light, though the darkness is near, balancing a world that no one else hears. She's their connection, their one last chance, a soul that listens when no one else can. But the whispers won't break her, they won't take control. Her spirit's unshaken, it's steady and whole. She hears the whispers in the shadows calling her name. Living in between, yet she's never the same. whispers never stop, they linger in the air. But she's stronger than the shadows, they can't keep her there. She walks through the night, her purpose defined. A voice for the lost, a strength undefined. The whispers surround her, but she won't lose control. She's the light in the darkness, the keeper of souls.